So beautiful friends, here we are today. This is all about our children, our gifts, and about what it means to move forward with culturally relevant special education. So beautiful friends, all right? So theme one. Theme one is all about, again, looking at, Turtle Island, and again, looking at special ed on Turtle Island for our communities. So beautiful friends, still to this day, my friends, that there is still definitely a disproportionate representation of our children, our Benojis and our Shkinigish. So our children, youth, and adults, right? Again, being identified in public school systems, and both at the elementary and secondary school level. But here's the thing, when you look at the data, we find that many of our Benojis, and our Shkinigish, so our young people, that they're often being identified with behavioral and or communication challenges, right? And the reason why that's really important to know is because, listen, there are things, related, again, to behavior and communication where we're really going to turn things on its head in a good way in special education. So I wrote this article, and it was, again, for an international journal, a global journal. And this particular one is about, again, how is it that we make, again, special ed culturally relevant, but also deal with the controversial term of indigenization. So what does it mean to indigenize our current systems, okay, of identification, placement, and review, right? So how do we do that? And how do we do it in a way that is culturally humble? All right, so that is really key. How do we do it in a way that is culturally humble? So I really want to, again, hammer this home, my friends, because it's important. Now, indigenizing, you're going to hear this everywhere, not just in elementary and secondary. You're going to hear it in all levels of education where people are looking to decolonize and indigenize. But I really want to emphasize that indigenizing, okay, does not mean, and I'm going to come back to that right now. Indigenizing does not mean, okay, that it's pan-Indian. So, it doesn't mean that here's the template, of how it's going to look like. So indigenizing means this: if there's 500 nations on Turtle Island, which is North America, the Circumcaribbean, and the Mesoamericas, then there's going to be nuances by community. So in other words, when we go through this, and you'll be creating with me a culturally relevant IEP, okay? I'll show you how to do that. But what we do is that we honor the communities and the students' backgrounds, and that the IPRC process and IEP, again, is culturally infused in a respectful way, again, to honor that student and family background. All right, so indigenizing is not about being pan-Indian. What it is that it's about being localized and specialized as well. So I'm going to go back, okay? I'm going to go back. Now, a lot of people are like, oh, this pan-Indian word, what is it, right? And that's how, when you have these blanket approaches that are like, this is the Indigenous way to do it, then that really is considered a pan-Indian approach. But there are things that we need to think about, right? So we need to think about. So even, in all of education, and special education is a branch of that there are these core ideas, right? Core ideas amongst our nations, that we know that education is a process. It is about respectful relationships, and it's about our cycles. It also, again, indigenizing special education is really about, about utilizing approaches that, again, honor the nation's particular worldview. Not only that, indigenizing special education, my friends, means that we also confront colonialism and also, again, white privilege that is embedded in the tools and the processes as well. Not only that, indigenizing special ed means that, again, the localized knowledges and languages come first, and also that it also is, again, something that is inclusive and real. It is a legitimate way to do things. But not only that, when we indigenize special education in a good way, even through things like, again, customizing an IEP, again, for a student and their family, that really what it does, indigenizing it, is a good thing. because what it does is that it turns the gaze back, right? And what it does is that it says, okay, listen, this particular process, needs to be, again, culturally humble. It needs to honor the children and their needs first, and it needs to be inclusive of family, community, and nation. But what it does, indigenizing it, really does benefit all individuals and beings that are involved in special ed. Because what it does is that when you indigenize, right, and you turn the gaze back, right, on what is considered, the normal way to do spec ed, that what you do is that, by challenging it, you also help, to take away and, chip away at any privilege and bias that is embedded within it. Okay. Now, here's some facts, my friends, about special education and about, again, our children and our youth. Fact one, for sure, right, is that Indigenous and non-Indigenous institutions and bodies, we have differing views on special education. And, when we look at Indigenous communities just here in Ontario, right? So Anishinaabe approaches to special education can be really diverse as well. My goodness, Anishinaabe communities like Sagamok, my own home community, our, again, approaches and our resources might be subtly different than other Anishinaabe communities. Say, for example, in Wiki, Mukwemekong on Manitoulin Island. But there are things that we definitely share in common. Fact two, this is really important because it is Indigenous kids and youth that are being asked to be multilingual and multicultural, okay? It is our kids that are doing that. So, and I'm going to give you an example afterwards as well. Fact three, again, systems of special ed, okay? So again, the entire IPRC process. So when we are developing the IEPs and we're, again, initiating those processes, we need to think about things like, listen, what is the intergenerational trauma that our children and youth are carrying? All right. So, our children, that don't have accommodations already face several challenges in the system. But then when we do have accommodations, there's those further layers of challenges as well. Fact four is that, again, it's really important that, special education systems, but also the representatives have deep relationships with the Indigenous community. And that means, also that our knowledges and languages are included. Fact five is definitely that Indigenous children and youth, okay, and this is all research-based, benefit from spec ed programming that honors the communities from which they originate, right? So it does. And definitely, my friends, definitely, that strengths-based assessments, right? And again, placements that foster the gifts of our children and youth are the key to transforming education. So I'm going to stop there with another thought, all right? Another thought. So the second thing that I had said was fact two, is that it is our children, our Benojis and Shkinigish, right, Indigenous kids that are required to be multilingual and also, not only that, right, multicultural, okay? So they are required to be. They have to be able to know how to code switch every day. They're doing it, right? When they go into class, when they are, again, like examining documents in their educational spaces, they're code switching all the time. And I really want to refer here to the work of Charlotte Peltier, and you need to check out her work. And the reason why it's important is because when we do have learners, that have accommodations, one of the critical things that Charlotte Peltier, makes really clear in her work about language acquisition for our kids is this, right? Is that English and French. So even if an Indigenous kid, our beautiful children and youth were not raised in their languages, okay? So they were not raised in it. Is that English and French, no matter what, right, is really a second dialect for our kids, right? So it is. So I want to give you an example. I want you to think about your own communities, okay? So whether you're Indigenous or not, okay, whether you're Indigenous or not, right, is that when we think about our own communities, when we're with our friends, when we're with our different colleagues, when we go back to wherever it is that we've come from, every person here has their own community nuances and language. And Charlotte Pelche talks about that, my friends, okay? She talks about that. So think about the nuances when you're with your family. Maybe you have certain sayings. Maybe you all of a sudden develop a certain accent when you're with those family or friend members. Maybe all of a sudden there's like, these inside phrases and terms that are only known by your family, right? So we all have our own community-based language. So when it comes to special education and our children, we really need to think about, again, the work of Charlotte Pelche, because she says, listen, let's be honest here, about the education system, right? Is that, when it comes to spec ed, what we often look at as, the standard languages, we often end up looking at, basically the Queen's English, right? So, or else the King's English now. But we look at English and French, the standardized versions, which are so flat at the same time, my friends. But think about English and French, and again, standardized forms of it, again, being enhanced, not only that, being informed by, again, Nishnabek, Haudenosaunee, Mushkegowuk, Wendat, Lene Lenape, by our languages, cultures, and ways of doing, okay? So again, important, because it is our kids, whether they were raised in languages or not, again, have these patterns, have these patterns that suggest that English as a second language, English as a second dialect and French as a second dialect is the more respectful approach here. So, beautiful friends, all right, I will go back to my beautiful little presentation here. Now, so we take a look at that, right? So again, the facts about spec ed and our youth. So we start on this foundation, my friends, okay? We start here together, because it's important that we all have the same knowledge moving forward this morning. So many of you might be specialists working in spec ed. Many of you may be Indigenous, non-Indigenous. Maybe you are like, again, working as EAs. Maybe you're a parent, a grandmother, maybe you're an auntie, maybe, you're a wonderful uncle. I don't know. But specialists working in the field of spec ed, my friends, right? The specialists, the EAs and all of those beautiful people bring a particular skill set that can be the bridge between classrooms and Indigenous learner success. But what happens is that Indigenous and non-Indigenous, again, people that work with our families, we need to accept that the student, the family, and the community are the experts in their own experiences. So here are questions. Here are questions that you need to be asking, right? That you need to be asking of your school board, your education authority, or else whatever body that you represent that you're involved with in spec ed for Indigenous kids. So some of the questions that you need to be asking are these 4 things, okay? These 4 things. Are there culturally relevant identification, placement, and program tools and resources available? Are there? What is available? What is available, again, within your school system, right? So what is available? And these are questions for parents too. It's like, listen, so beyond like, the standardized tools, what do you have that is about cultural relevance? Not only that, the other question is this, again, for children, youth, and families as well, especially like, when they're about to become involved, again, like in the IPRC process. So it's asking the question, is there an Indigenous-based advocacy and support system existent for the learner and their family? Because remember, folks, these are protective factors, right? So again, a child and a young person, it's the entire family that needs to be supported, again, throughout this journey, okay? Because that's what it is, it's a journey. But not only that, right? How is the learner and family provided with options, right? In terms of a holistic assessment and plan moving ahead, right? So again, what options are there for assessment, right? And planning? Are there options, or else is there just like one particular IEP that's available? Or, is there, a holistic form? And we'll be creating one today together. Now, And if those questions cannot be answered or addressed, okay, by the system or else by the representatives, then you need to ask, why not, right? We're in a time where, that you can ask, okay, well, why not? But also, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to move ahead? So, beautiful friends. So for educators, right? So again, for non-Indigenous specialists, but not only that, I would even extend it beyond this, okay? So not just for non-Indigenous specialists, but it's also for our own people. Because remember, I'm Anishinaabe, I'm from Sgamuk, I'm from Sagmuk. But listen, I might be from Sagmuk and Anishinaabe, but listen, that does not make me a cultural insider into Haudenosaunee territory, Mushkegowuk, and even other, again, Anishinaabe communities, okay? So it's important to know that. It's important to know that. So that's why when it comes to my beautiful friends, when it comes to, again, again, part of our own retraining and reframing of how we approach special ed, we need to consider these things, all right? So again, no matter what your role is in spec ed, we all need to think about this. How do we become allies, accomplices, and co-conspirators, okay, in special education together? And we do it for the benefit of the kids. We're doing it for them. So what that means, accomplices and co-conspirators, right? So within your own school board or school, right? So how is it that you can either make the policies really flexible, or how can you change the policies and programs to ensure that they meet the needs, again, of our Benojis and our Shkini Gish, right? So that's what it is. How do we become allies for each other? Because when we're allies and accomplices for each other, that benefits the children, family, communities, and nation. Not only that, we also, again, need to learn how to develop a critical eye, how to look at the tools, again, of assessment and special education and learn how to decolonize them. So I will just give you an example, okay, my beautiful friends, and I'll give you an example just with forms, okay, just with forms. So when we even just think about, again, the individual education plan, one of the first things that I would say as a piece of advice and recommendation in order to indigenize just the document itself, my friends, is to start again using translation. So again, I'll go back to the example of Wiki. So with Wikwemikong, where my mom was from, my mom's been in the spirit world for about 27 years. So Wikwemikong has a very different dialect from Sgamuk, okay? Different ways of saying things. So what you want to do is with that form, you want to be able to translate if you're able to. So that is one of the first things. Look at that form. What areas can be converted into the language so that you would have our language first and then English, okay? And again, the order is important, my friends, right? So again, the language first and then English and then French or whatever it is, but language first. So that is one of, again, the very first and very simple ways to start indigenizing, again, the actual forms itself and any communication that goes out. Not only that, my beautiful friends, is that the other part of that, so that's the decolonizing part, indigenizing. But not only that, we also design special ed plans with that whole child in mind. So we know that, right? So we think about the child, but in this way. So I'm going to give you an example of a Anishinaabe specific. So when we think about special ed planning, especially from a Sgamuk perspective, we want to make sure that the physical, the emotional, the intellectual, and the spiritual needs of again, our children in those spec ed plans and processes are met, okay? Now that's Anishinaabe, but that's why it's important to know the community. So say, for example, if you're in Haudenosaunee territory, if you're in Ohsweken and they're saying, listen, we don't relate to that medicine wheel, that's not ours. But here, here is our measure, here's our standards, right? So we really want to make sure that our children that are in special education, that they that they have their needs met, but in these ways. Maybe it's, the great law of peace. Maybe it's honoring the Geswenta, the wampum belt. So important to honor the culture and language first. Now, a lot of people might be like, what are you talking about? That seems like a lot of extra work. Well, listen, click on some of the studies I have here, because culture and language for our Benojis and our Shkinigish, my friends, really serves as a foundation for identity and self-esteem. And that, my friends, is one of the greatest protective factors in special education, and a protective factor for that student overall, okay? So not only that, we want to make sure that we engage and honor the community, right? And elder knowledges or knowledge keeper knowledges in spec ed. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well. One of the examples, my friends, especially with the IPRC process, right, is again to embed traditions in it. Because right now, the IPRC process is very much like this. It goes like this. It's all focused in on the student. There's not a lot of reciprocity happening there, right? So again, it really is, you have a team, that's helping, again, to make decisions and recommendations and testing, but it's very much going like this. So one of the things is this: infuse tradition in the process. Maybe before any of the meetings during the IPRC process, if your tradition is to smudge, then everybody starts with the smudge, not just the student and the parent or guardian or family. But listen, there are things, that are small things that can start to, again, decolonize and indigenize, again, spec ed practices. So think about it, right? So think about it. Mushkegowik, what are your traditions, right? Métis people, what are your traditions, right? Haudenosaunee, what are your traditions? Inuit, what are your traditions? So again, it's about infusing it throughout, that we start in the same sacred space. So it's important for the entire team before the meetings, again, to be involved in that sacred space, because it's about relationships and reciprocity. Not only that, the other part of the retraining and reframing of ourselves, right? And again, of the way that we go about special ed, is to understand that Indigenous approaches in special education contribute to inclusive education overall, okay? So when we infuse it with our practices, again, with our own teachings, that we contribute to spec ed overall. And not only that, my beautiful friends, right? It also, again, when we start to do that, it really does give almost like, a permission to dream bigger about how it is that spec ed can look. Now, beautiful friends, all right? What I am going to do is I'm going to show you again, quite an extraordinary, again, video. And it's this beautiful story, beautiful story coming from our own people about, again, disabilities and accommodations in schools. And I'm going to show you this story.
It's extremely important that we have Indigenous knowledge and ways of being, knowing, and doing incorporated into our education system. The Indigenous peoples within British Columbia are very unique and very diverse. And especially when it comes to their belief systems around Indigenous people with disabilities, there's many similarities, but there is very clear and distinct differences as well.
Well, there wasn't really a lot of attention given to like the disability. It was a community effort to help everybody.
I don't even think there's a word for it in our Nisga'a language. Everybody is a welcome in our village.
There are different examples of things that have always been here, like not sticking to the norms involving gender or sexuality. I feel like there has always been something for people like myself with a mental disability.
From my territory in the Intlakatm Nation, my aunties and my uncles instilled in me the belief that when somebody had a difference, they also had a strength.
There was no difference. Everyone is equal.
We come from a place of trauma,
We have intergenerational trauma, so we don't trust easily. I'm sitting here today proudly wearing a piece of my regalia because over 50 years ago, they took our regalia away. And bringing back cultural dancing and being able to know where you come from and your crest is really important.
Culture wasn't always, I guess, the priority for the district, but teachers and the workers that were with me found some ways to incorporate some teachings into how I was being taught.
Within my family, we are hand drummers, and the inclusion of song and dance is extremely important for our healing and for our well-being, overall well-being, not only for people living with disabilities, but just as individuals.
I guess when it comes to when I dance during powwows, it regulates like pressure in my body and helps ground me. It just feels really nice and relaxing, and afterwards I can just feel like myself.
I've been asked a lot of the time why I stayed in such a rural area as opposed to staying in the city. I loved the fact that culture was in everything, but we need physical people in our communities.
Whoever is working with said student or person needs to have an understanding of both the disability itself and then the cultural needs.
What I recommend for every school district is to connect with their Indigenous community that's in their backyard. Meet with the elders, create a council, whatever it might be, but have some open discussion and dialogue. What are the key beliefs that they want to incorporate into their school system that are going to support the Indigenous children in that territory?
Giving that person, like physical support, emotional support, spiritual support.
We need to know where we have come from to know where we're going.
It is important because I'm an Indigenous person and want to know my culture.
Now we're at centralizing culture, language, and worldview in the IPRC process. Okay, number one, all right? Number one, even before we get to it, okay, number one. One thing that has to happen, my friends, and this is why it's important to have access to knowledge keepers. You need to rename or have a naming ceremony of some kind, again, to rename special education. All right, you need to rename it. And it needs to have an Indigenous source, right? So we need to start from the sacred. You need to name it, right? So the reason why I say that, so you got to remember again, a lot of those protective factors. So when you're a special education, team member, a parent, a guardian, a grandmother, auntie, uncle, whatever your role is, right? We have to remember that Indigenous peoples, right? So again, 100% of us are affected by residential schools and intergenerational trauma. So when we think about schooling, right? And when we think about words like special education, that it really is a loaded term. So one of the first things you need to do is consider changing it. Instead of being called special education, what are you going to call it? How do you start it? You're going to offer that tobacco to a knowledge keeper, to come up with a name? Or are you going to have involve the community, right? And, have a workshop and rename parts of this together. But it has to be renamed in the language with the appropriate description and translation. That is absolutely critical, okay? Because listen, special education carries a lot of baggage. It carries a lot of baggage for our people. And it is definitely, the whole term itself, already, places our people in a place that is not of comfort, okay? So again, that's important to do. So I'm going to go right to the IPRC process, my beautiful friends, right here. All right. So how else, right? So the IPRC process, we know, is a really lengthy one, right? We know it is. And we often don't even have the capacity. We don't have the people, right? The specialists in order, to go through these processes, right? But listen, this is why renaming is important. It's really, again, important to do. So again, even the word like roles, okay, so roles. So actually, like, what is like, a role, right? So again, thinking about the language and the term. So if we go like with Anishinaabe, right, Anishinaabemowin. So do we have one of the people sitting there, right, sitting there, again, being, one of our beautiful Kinamage people, Kinamage Kwe, Kinamage Nene. So is it going to be like, one of our, again, our teaching people? So who is it? So you want to have the roles, again, clearly identified, but you want it in the language, right? So you want it in the language as well. So the other thing is take a look at this, right? Now, there is freedom. So the regulations, right? The regulations in Ontario, say, listen, right? Listen, you need to have at least 3 persons, again, like, on the IPRC committee, right? So you have to have 3 persons. Now, the regulation is composed of at least 3 persons. So my beautiful friends, so if it's at least, that's where you need to have that itinerant person, that itinerant knowledge keeper, right? Not only that, maybe it's going to be your Indigenous lead. But the reality is, my beautiful friends, part of the IPRC process is to rename it in the language. Because listen, that is part of, again, decolonizing it, but also, again, making it specific to the community that you are working with, okay? So language, right? And also, what does it actually mean? So I'll give you another example, right? So this is why renaming is important. So just to give you an example in our language, right? So if you're going to have, as part of the roles, right? The part of the role is the student, right? So a student, that term, right, can be pretty flat. But listen, instead of the student, maybe you have the Benongis or the Shkinigish, right? And, whatever, again, like, Haudenosaunee, like an Ungwe or Mushkegowik, whatever your language, you start to use the words that, that's decolonizing and indigenizing it. So in other words, see, here in our territory, Benongis, right? Loosely translated, it is a child, right? A child. But listen, what is a Benongis really? A Benongis is a little spirit, right? And what do? We raise little spirits. So can you imagine that a part of the IPRC roles and the definitions now change from just student to Benongis, who is the little spirit that we are working with, okay? A shift in the thinking. So again, so you want to make sure that, that again, and it's regulation, you can have more than 3 persons. And if you're on reserve, you're not subject to, again, to provincial, again, to particular provincial guidelines, because of the federal relationship. You have so much freedom, to be able to think, to think outside of the box and say, this is how we are going to reframe spec ed. You want to rename it, my friends, okay? Because and this is also, again, research-based, one of the greatest devastating news that parents feel that they get is that their kid is having trouble in school. And then you couple that with like, listen, because we're trying to normalize special education in schools, but there's still a stigma, right? A stigma. Our parents and guardians are like, wow, it's my kid, it's my kid. And the thing is, that's why it's important. So it's about the renaming and involving people of meaning, right? So that's why that committee is a minimum of 3 people. And you're thinking, oh, the larger, the more like, the more complicated it will begin. But again, it goes back to the communities. So again, it's having that knowledge keeper there that can also, again, share the language, right? But they have to be compensated, right? So again, that's important and fairly, all right? They have to be. So I'm going to go back to this, again, back to the IPRC process. But not only that, right? So again, the renaming. And that is just, and even just minor things. You don't have to translate the whole document, but even starting off like, in ceremony, doing your smudge, maybe it's using your white pine, to begin things in a good way. Maybe it's using like, again, like, cedar water. It could be so many ways that you're going to start this off. Now, not only that, right? Not only that, it also says a school board trustee may not be a member of an IPRC. So that's the provincial regulations, my friends, right? Provincial. But if you're working, again, like, on reserve, You are not bound to that. So maybe you have, again, on your education authority, somebody that would be really meaningful to sit on that IPRC committee, somebody that has the background, that has the story of the community, has the teachings. So again, consider that as well. All right. So the IPRC set up, right, to review who the Benongis is. So change the wording, the student, so not just the student, but the Benongis, this beautiful being. Not only that, describing the student's strengths and needs, okay? Now, this is why this second point, it's important that that the model for special education come from the community, okay? So I said this earlier, and this is the foundational piece, is that the student's strengths and needs, again, we're not just talking about the academics here, but we're talking about, listen, so where are they? So if you're in Anishinaabe, right? So where are they in the 7 stages of life? And if you look at the characteristics of the wandering life, those 14-year-olds, if they're getting assessed, is things like taking risks and listening to peers just part of the wandering life. So that's why it's important that the culture inform it, because the student's strengths and needs, when you're measuring it against a colonial system, right, may really disadvantage the learner and the family. So you need to have that community model. And what is it? So what is, a good human being in Haudenosaunee culture, again, in Mushkegowuk, Métis, Inuit, right? So what is it? So that model would be the one to help describe the student's strengths and needs. So what are their strengths and needs? If you're in Anishinaabe, right? What are their strengths and needs physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually, right? So again, it's it complements and honors who they are. Now, decide whether or not the student should be identified as exceptional, right? So, and here are the thoughts on this, is that, the IPRC process, there are times that students are not deemed exceptional, but are provided supports in class, right? So no matter what the meeting is about, right, the outcome should always, again, identify how to support the learner, okay? Because if they're well, the student is not identified as exceptional, it doesn't, again, leave us, in a space where we cannot support that student, because we need to find ways to do that with, again, the resources from community, using resources like Good Minds. So again, if it is, again, a language issue, my friends, so again, it could be communication or processing of information, then we want to use books and resources that really support and honor, again, the people, okay? So that's where it begins. Not only that, right, there are several areas of exceptionality, and I'm just going to go to these again a little bit later on. But, the IPRC, right, it's all about, deciding, providing, discussing, and reviewing. So all through these stages, right, so all through these stages, deciding on the appropriate placement for the student. Now, the problem with that language, my friends, is that it says deciding, right? So even reframing that word, using something from the language, saying that this is going to be because it is a relationship between a special education team and a family and community, right? That it's not really about making a decision, but what it is about is that it really is about sharing in a relationship and coming up again, with a plan that is, again, that has been vetted by everybody on that team. So again, the reasons for the placement, right? The reasons for the placement in the special education, in the special education class. So the reasons, right? So the reasons and rationale, my friends, should also include, and going back to that model, that community model about strengths and needs, right? So how is the student strong? How is the student strong in the community model, again, of growth and development, as far as the stages of life? So again, it should also provide that. So what are the areas, again, to be worked on? Okay, so that is the provide part. Discuss, right? So the discussing of it. Discussing proposals for special education programs and services. So when it comes to the discussion, it really is about the student having an active voice as well. That's why it's important to have, again, the entire family and community involved, right? And reviewing. So we go to the review. Now it says review at least once in a school year, unless the parent gives written notice dispensing with the review. All right. So I'm going to tell you about that review stage. That last stage, my friend, the whole review thing that was included in the IPRC process. So this is all coming from the Special Education in Ontario document, okay, the regulations. But why would they have to have a review, right? So we are going to reflect. We are going to go back. We're going to take a look at progress, right? And they're saying once in a school year. Well, we know we have to look at capacity issues. But here's the thing, which is really, again, alarming about a review, my friends, right? Is this, right? So a review can often become a check mark, right? It can become a check mark. We've done our due diligence, right? So change that, change the review, right? To reflecting on the gifts, right? Reflecting on the gifts of the Benojis or the Shkinigish, reflecting on whatever it is, or else, reflecting on the B'modswin, the good life. So that's what I mean by, looking at that review in such a different way. And that whole thing, right, about dispensing the review, right? So the reason why they have, listen, if the parent gives written notice that they don't want to do the review anymore, then we don't do it. But that whole review thing actually speaks to the colonial system, right? Because what it does is that, again, saying that, we'll dispense with it and then we're just done with it, speaks to a certain level of mistrust. So the review had to be put in, right? So that's why it's important. Change that. We're not doing a review, right? We are reflecting, we are, again, examining. We are looking at in a good way, right? We're looking in a good way at the progress of, again, that Benojis, that little spirit. Okay. So again, so as we go through, I'm just giving you again, some advice. Okay, beautiful friends. And then we will come back. So the IPRC process. Here's the other thing, the location. So the IPRC process, the location. So where we're going to meet with the parents and the family, okay? So, and where we need to meet with them is definitely not in a building. So we need to meet with them in a place that is comfortable to them. It could be a neutral space, right? But it has to be outside of those four walls. And you're probably thinking, well, why? Why would we do this? Because we got to remember that a special education model that's culturally relevant will bring the team and the services to the Benojis, the family, and the community, right? What it does, it naturalizes and it normalizes accommodations. And that's the way that it should be. We all learn differently. All right, so I'm going to go to the next one, my beautiful friends. Okay, so I've got it right here. And this is it. So the IPRC process, many of you know this, you've been through it. I've been through it, right? There's so many steps to the entire process. Okay, so many steps. So part of this, right, is really ensuring, right, that culture and language and traditions is embedded throughout. But not only that, my beautiful friends, right? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples here, right? And this has a lot to do with communication in our people. If you want to describe the IPRC process, don't do it in a booklet. Don't do it in a booklet. Don't do all of the steps in a booklet, my friends. If you want to have a community accessible description of the IPRC process, then what you need to do, my beautiful friends, is again, just to create, it's going to be a short, it could be a 5 to 7 minute video, that has closed captioning, because that is something that speaks again, to our community. Instead of going through, oh my goodness, here's the parent guide. Here are all the steps I got to read through. But instead, what you do is that, again, we make it as, again, naturalized, but, as safe and comfortable for the family, right? So again, and having those short videos rather than a ton of text, is what works, right? And always, again, again, no matter what formats we're using, we need to make sure that we always start off with the unease, that we always start off with the protocols, that any of our communication emulates again, that good human being according to Haudenosaunee teachings, Anishinaabeg, Mushkegowuk, Inuit, and Métis, okay? So I'm gonna go back to this and I'm gonna again share with you ways again to indigenize, but more specifically for your situation, the IPRC process, right? Okay, so again, how to do that. So we start again, you know, you look, you know, we go to the notice of the IPRC meeting, which is the second block, right? So really, that notice that goes out, my beautiful friends, right, should definitely be one, you know, that focuses on the beautiful gifts of that learner, you know, gives like, you know, again, you know, gives like, you know, some background again to the meeting, where it's going to be located. And remember, the meeting will, you know, be ideally located in the community at a place of neutrality or safety. But please, you know, so think about, again, relocating those meetings so that they're done in a safe space where parents feel welcomed in the family. Not only that, you know, so preparation for the IPRC meeting, right? So that preparation is not just like, you know, the gathering of documentation now, my beautiful friends, that actually what it is also turned into, okay, is that you also need to think about, again, you know, again, work with that knowledge keeper, that itinerant special ed, you know, again, knowledge keeper that comes from the community, that is also, again, knows the language and culture, okay? But you want to think about things like the traditions and ceremony. Are we going to start with a smudge? Are we going to start with cedar water? Are we going to start with white pine? Not only that, right? You need to think about things we're going to celebrate in ceremony. So what type of food are we going to have and drinks, right? So what is it? Because again, it's about being in that community together. And then when we attend the IPRC meeting, how do we attend it? You know, so what is the location? What is the setup of chairs, right? So instead of having, you know, a desk, you know, or else like sitting around a table, do we sit in a circle together? Do we go and sit in the longhouse together? So again, it really is refocusing, my friends, you know, about where it's located and how we attend it. You know, is there particular protocols when we attend the IPRC meeting? Do we want everybody, you know, that comes to that IPRC meeting, right? So again, all those that identify as female spirits, do we want them to wear a skirt to the meeting, right? Do we want them to wear their ribbon skirts? Again, not only that, recording at an IPRC meeting. So this is something that is really, really critical. So I want you to think about this, right? You need to have a recorded document of some kind, right? A recorded document. But I want you to consider other ways of recording as well, right? I want you to consider, you know, that maybe, you know, another way to also record, my friends, is to have the knowledge keeper. Maybe, you know, it is the creation of a wampum belt that signifies the journey, you know, the journey of that meeting, right? So there's so many things that we can do to make the IPRC process embody a two-eyed seeing view. One where, again, on the left eye, the language, culture, traditions, and worldview, okay, are the foundation. Then we look critically through the right eye and take those things from the technological and Western world that will empower our people and our children in a good way, right? So there's so many ways to do with this, okay? So there's so many ways, again, my friends, to naturalize this in a good way. So consider some of these things as well, right? And again, the decision. So any of those decisions. Now, the IPRC statement of decision, and this is why I'm telling you, start changing the language. How scary is that, right? It's actually mapped out, you know, and this is right from the, again, spec ed document. We are going to have a statement of decision, right? So that is a pretty, again, those are strong words and they're scary words. So again, think about it in your community. It's not going to be a statement of a decision, but maybe what it becomes, right? What it becomes is that it becomes the voice of the good minds. Okay. So maybe you change that statement of decision to, again, the voices of the good minds. All right. Or whatever, again, your culture, again, really does reflect. And parental consent, right? parental consent. So I want you to think about alternatives as well, right? You know, because we have like, you know, well, you've got to sign this, there's signatures, but that's why it's important to look at the forms, infuse language, simplify as well. And with parental consent, right? Is there other ways to give parental consent other than signing the form? Is it possible to give verbal consent? Because that's also, again, that is completely legal to give verbal consent as well. So not only that, you know, so we take a look, right? We got to remember that's why it's important to change the wording is that, listen, it is the learner, the family, and the community, right? That again, that are a part of this. It's not just the learner, it is the entire community that is going to be that wraparound service for that learner. All right, so a couple of things there. So I'm just going to show you some of the placement decisions, and you might already know this already, okay? But it's always good to be able to share this. So if you don't have a background in spec ed, but here's what happens, friends, is that this is typically what is the placement decisions. So once our Benojis and Shkinigish, right, go through again, like the go through the IPRC process, but not only that, my friends. So even if you know there is like you know a learner that hasn't been identified as exceptional, okay, so step one. Again, we don't abandon them. We don't abandon them. So again, you know, they were again like you know highlighted and addressed, you know, for a very, you know, important reason. So we will still find ways to support them. You know, we always will. So these are the placements. So there's really 5 placements, and you might be familiar with this. There's a regular class with indirect supports, right? And that what happens is like, you know, there will be, again, like, you know, examples of resources and things like that to support the student. The second one is, again, having the student in a regular class with, again, resource assistant, okay, resource assistants. So again, what they do, again, is that they're in the regular class for most of the day, but get specialized instruction. Now, there's a regular class with withdrawal assistance. Now, the student is placed in the regular class and receives instruction outside of the class. And then you see a special education class full-time. Irregardless of the placement decision, okay? Irregardless, okay? Just like mental health, right? So mental health now is like normative, right? We can talk about mental health and use those words very easily. So listen, celebration and ceremony. Whatever the placement decision is, right? So no matter what, the resources, they've got to be Indigenous authentic, right? We want that. But not only that, make the placement decision a celebration. A celebration, again, with the entire class, right? They know who's getting special education services. That's why you need to change the name. But again, make it a celebration, right? You know, a celebration in the class of, you know, that, you know, of the difference in learning. And not only that, you know, that we are going to work as nichkas so that the peers in the class can be the nichkas and the supportive, again, you know, supportive wraparound services for that learner. Okay. So again, and you might even consider, my friends, so if there is like, you know, definitely a time where, again, like, you know, the learner is like being asked to like, you know, to go into like, you know, a different space to receive supportive services, you know what? Have your, like, you know, have the learners walk together and support that student. Go into the room together where the learning is going to be. Take that entire network, because then it becomes a family of special education, right? It really does, so that the accommodations become normative and normalized. So you would have seen that, so you might know that one. But I also, beautiful friends, want to share with you a really, again, an important, again, resource and activity, because I told you you're going to leave here with resources. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we are going to do an activity with this. All right. So going from this slide, there are 5 very different special education resources, okay, that are Indigenous specific, or that can be modified, my beautiful friends, again, to incorporate the teachings and cultures in a two-eyed seeing way for your learners. So I'm just going to stop sharing, and I'm going to show you a couple of them right now. All right, so I'm going to actually just go to this one right now, but I'll just show you it, my beautiful friends, and it is this website. Now, it comes from the Ontario Teachers Federation. Okay, so take a look. And what I love about this is that there are so many ways, okay, for us to, again, to use a two-eyed seeing approach when we are working with students of exceptionalities, right? So again, here are the exceptionalities that are determined by the IPRC process. Let me just go and show it, right? So these are the ones that are often, again, these are the exceptionalities. And what I love about this, my friends, okay, so let me just go to, so let's go and take a look, my beautiful friends, at the autism spectrum disorder, right? So what I love about this site is that it gives you a description of the exceptionality, but not only that, right? So what it does is that it also gives you an opportunity, right, to say, okay, this beautiful learner, okay, this Benongis or this Shkinigish, right, really does require some support in the area, of listening skills. So you have all of these wonderful tools here to support you, right? So this is the right eye constructive critical way of utilizing resources. And then, of course, my beautiful friends, I'll just go to attention skills. It gives you those strategies, the instructional ones for the teacher, how the environment can be set up. Not only that, ideas for assessment as well. So again, that is the right eye. Okay, that's the right eye of the two-eyed seeing approach. But if it's like, listen, I would just like to, again, be able to think about my overall student needs. So maybe you have students that were not, again, determined exceptional, but you're like, listen, they're not determined exceptional, but we need to support them. So you have, again, all kinds of, again, opportunities, right? Opportunities to support them. And again, grief management, right? So grief management. And I'm going to tell you, folks, we know this. Indigenous kids, right? Indigenous kids that, listen, we experience grief in so many forms. So again, having grief management and trauma-informed schools also supports the wraparound services for, again, our Benongis and our kids. So it's an amazing site. Okay, it's an amazing site. And I'm just going to go back, right? And there's other, again, diagnosed conditions, right? So again, you might have, again, like, people that have Tourette's, there might be other, again, like, again, like exceptionalities. But again, this is the two-eyed seeing approach. Chibape is really about laughter and humor. So, excuse me. But so again, that's why having the knowledge keeper, else that itinerant person is important, right? That really is, again, like the cultural and linguistic go-to. Because Chibape, when it comes to the IPRC process, right, and the IEP, there's not a lot of joy. And if you think about it, right, if you think about it, it's pretty like, it doesn't seem to be a joyous occasion. But, when our people laugh with each other, right, when we laugh with each other, we know that that is like, the building of trust. It's the building of a relationship. So that's why it's important to have that, right? To have that itinerant person that can actually say, listen, like, they are that cultural linguistic bridge. So they can say, listen, like, what, it's okay. It's okay that we laugh together, that we smile, that we celebrate the joy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm just going to share this, and then we're going to do this together, right? So again, when we think about, again, the IEP, right? The IEP, we know that it includes so many items, and that is really like, quite, it can be quite onerous, right? So again, so an IEP has all of these, sets of data, but not only that, then there's like little branches within it. So that is why it's really important, again, to have those videos, to rename things, but not only that, to use the community model, right? So I'm going to go to the second one, the profile of the student. We'll see this in the IEP when we develop ours, is that, listen, it's not just about the student's name, okay? So there's their birth certificate name or English name, but what about, again, the spirit name? What about totems? What about clans? Not only that, how do they self-identify? So again, what's really important, my friends, you got to remember, before colonialism, all 500 nations had 5+ gender roles, okay? 5+, not just male, female. So again, there's the opportunities there to honor our communities. The students' strengths and needs, right? So what are their strengths in terms of the community's view, right? And traditions on culture and on, again, rites of passage, and also our developmental levels, right? Because every community has it, whether it is the 7 stages of life, 4 stages of life, every community has them. So my beautiful friends, there's this wonderful thing that's called SMART. And it really is, and it's embedded in IEPs, and it's having, again, specific, measurable, action-oriented words, realistic and relevant and time-limited, again, outcomes in the IEP. So I'm going to share with you why that the SMART approach is also that beautiful right-eyed, constructively critical way to look at westernized and technological resources, but pull the best of what works, right? So remember, we're using 2-eyed seeing, but always the left eye, the closest to the heart, being the foundation of the student's family, culture, and language always. So SMART, right? So there is this one version of SMART, and then I'm going to share with you the important and also, again, definitely the version of SMART, my friends, that is, again, Indigenous in origin. So again, it's something that you could easily apply, my beautiful friends, okay? Easily apply anywhere, again, in your own communities. So I'm just going to, again, just go to this right now, all right? So again, going to go and find this beautiful, again, SMART, okay? Again, the SMART, and let me just grab it here. And what's really, again, for me, something that I really love about, this SMART approach is that it's measurable. So I'm going to show you, this is the right eye. So this is the Western eye that I'm going to show you. Okay. So the one that, that can be very, again, helpful, that it is measurable, and it is something that can be very respectful as well. All right. So you should be able to see this very shortly. All right. So here's SMART, right? SMART IEP. So remember, I have a lot of those, again, 2-eyed seeing documents and resources embedded in the PowerPoint. So please feel free to go, right? So SMART, right? Here's an example, specific. Instead of in the IEPs, we'll have, student A will increase their study skills. But a specific statement is like, listen, student A will show these skills, but this is how. So it's specific. It's measurable, right? It's measurable. So what it does is that it gives, again, like very, very clear indicators, right? That student A will read a passage of text, right? At these words per minute. But listen, here's the key word, passage of text. So the passage of text that, in this case, would often be a resource, so go to Good Minds. You get a resource that, again, really does reflect and really supports the self-esteem of that student, right? Of that learner, that Benojis. But not only that, the use of action words so that it is measurable. And it says, listen, it needs to be realistic and relevant, right? So again, it is really clear here in, again, these statements about, again, about how student A, again, is doing. Not only that, right? Again, it's really, really clear. I want to share with you the Anishinaabe SMART principles. And these are the ones that we're going to use to do our IEP. Oh, yes, Anishinaabe. All right, not Anishinaabe, but ones, my friends, that you can use, when you're, again, looking at your own IPRC processes and the IEPs. So here's SMART from an Indigenous lens. So S stands for, it needs to be strengths-based for the learner. Okay, it has to be strengths-based. Not only that, right? It has to be measurable by community standards. So that's why you need to know, okay, you need to have that model from the community. What is the good what is a good human being? What does, a Anishinaabe learner or Mushkegowik or Haudenosaunee or Métis or Inuit learner, what do they do in that first stage of life? The second stage of life, what is the expectations, right? And strengths-based means it is looked at holistically, physically, again, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. And then the A stands for a meaningful inclusion of culture, language, and worldview, right? That is critical. So that is, again, the A. The R stands for relationships, reciprocity, respect, relevance, and resources. So relationships means that we develop the good ones based upon the protocols of that nation. Reciprocity means that it's not top down, that we all give and we all learn something from, again, from our Benojis. Respect for the community, and that, again, the process is relevant, that it actually has meaningful outcomes for that learner. And then the T, okay? So again, the T in SMART stands for two-eyed seeing and thinking outside of the box as a team. So that is SMART, okay? SMART, but from the, again, from an Indigenous lens, right? Now, this is where we are going to, again, infuse in a good way some of the things that we have learned today. All right, so you're going to end up at this site at EduGains. Now, these are just sample IEPs, okay? Just sample. Again, you take a look. Okay, so I want you just to pick one, all right? So again, pick one, and all you're going to do is you're going to go and open it up, whatever it may be, okay? So you're going to go and open it up. I'm going to show you how it is that we're going to put the sacred back in the IEP, okay? Let's put the sacred back in. So very typical IEP, all right? And the one that I've selected is the one that, again, is really about, again, is a communication one. It's language, okay? So a language issue. So I want you to take a look at this, friends. Okay, very typical IEP, right? And this one, again, is online. But the one thing that you'll notice about it is that it's a lot of good right-eyed information, okay? A lot of good right-eyed information. So again, thinking about two-eyed seeing, it's got the right-eyed information. But the problem with this, my friends, is right off the bat, right? So instead of calling it an individual education plan, okay? So you could have that, as the second word, you could move that to the right. But in the language of the territory and reflecting the, again, student involved, what could this plan actually be called? What if we call it something else, like developing our gifts? But again, have it in the language of the land, all right? Not only that, right? Or the only for that. So if you take a look, right? So let's take a look. And I'm going to go to the student profile, and it starts right here. And even the layout, friends, right? Even the layout. So those things could be changed as well to reflect. It should have the symbols, the culture and the language of the community. Look at the student profile. Again, this is important information, their Ontario education number. But listen, is that really the thing that's going to start us off here? So if we're thinking about community and our learners, what should start us off, right? So what should start us off? So for your community, is it, as part of the student profile, does the community come up first? The clan, does the clan come up first? The totem, right? Does that sacred name come up, right? Then the English name, right? Not only that, take a look here at the gender part, right? Are the only options going to be male or female, or else prefer not to say? Or else, what is it going to be? So think about that. Let's start bringing back, those gender roles and investigating them and having options, right? Not only that, right? We have the date of birth here. So think about community knowledges, right? So date of birth, is it really date of birth, right? Or else, can we change that, change that terminology, right? Can we change that terminology, to, again, to choosing, right? Or else, the date I chose my parents, right? So think about our Indigenous philosophies, the date I chose my parents on earth, whatever it may be. Not only that, right? And it has the school information. That's important, right-eye information, my friends, right? But it has the principal's name there, which is important because they are, again, always a member of the IPRC. But listen, so what about not just the principal, but who is, again, that support network? Who is the person from the community that's the itinerant special ed person, right? So not just the principal, right? But again, the profile is who supports them, all right? So again, that is really, really important to be able to do, okay? So not only that, right? So it has current grade and special class. This is easy, my friends, in order to change the wording there, right? So again, we could have the words like kinomage, so to have like, so again, what is that teaching space, right? But especially, so take a look at your own and think about ways that you can make this again, like, growing our gifts, or else like, sharing the gifts, of our people, so retitling it. So you can still have IEP, but it's not prominent. It is really about gifts. So you see what I'm saying about, again, changing it in those ways, right? Now, relevant assessment data. Now, this is the right eye. This is the important things that you need to have in it, right? You need that right eye. But here's the thing, right? That assessment data, if you notice right now, right? That assessment data is all, is all coming from, again, specific sources, right? So we have some from the educator, we have the bench, like the different assessments from the special education team. But listen, where is the assessment data? And not only that, the qualitative data from the family, from the, again, knowledge keeper, even from the student themselves, right? This will give you a more holistic picture. So your relevant assessment data should be, you might consider doing things like organizing it in these ways. Here is, again, the assessment data related to physical space and physical needs. Here is the assessment data that is directly related to the emotional development. And this information here is directly related to the intellectual. Then there should be another assessment data piece that's all about the sacred and the spiritual, okay? Now, the strengths and areas of need. This definitely should be, we have the right-eyed, gross motor skills, mathematical skills, that those are their areas of strength. But listen, what is really missing here is the left eye, the foundation of culture and language. So where is it, my friends? So where is the community model here, right? So where is our Benonji's, where's our Benonji's example of strength, right? On their ways of being a good human being, according to the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, the Mushkegowuk, the Métis, or else the Inuit people, okay? So that's it. You got to have those areas of strength, but also it has to be culturally informed. This is the right eye, okay? This is the right eye information, but we're missing that left eye, which is foundational. So there's a major gap, my friends, a major gap in the IEP, okay? So, and here it is here. So again, good right eye information, right? Having those subjects, so showing where the IEP applies. So where there's going to be accommodations, right? So accommodations, right? So we take a look, right? So we take a look at these accommodations, right? So not only that, so we have the right eye information, but not only that. So for example, my friends, if one of the areas of need comes from the left eye, right? So if one of those things, is again learning, so one of the right eye is learning more about their role within their clan, well, that should also be listed as something that they're going to work on as well, right? Because again, we need that left eye there. Not only that, right? So we take a look, okay? We take a look. We've got instructional, environmental, and assessment accommodations. What is missing from the environmental piece, my friends, is land. So, okay, you need your own column. You need your own column here that has land-based activities, okay? So it's accommodations for learning, but listen, we're also going to do accommodations out on the land, because that is critical, land and culture, okay? So what is, again, the accommodations that we are going to do that occur on the land, where again, those beautiful learners have connections with the more than human beings, the tree beings, the water, the air, fire. So again, there are things that are missing, right? So provincial assessments, right? So again, and that is, of course, the provincial assessment, we're referring really to EQAO. So when it comes here, they have the provincial assessments, right? But not only that, my friends, where is, like right in here as well, in this particular section of the IEP, this particular page is just accepting the provincial data, right? The provincial data as the norm. When really, my beautiful friends, in this section, we should also, again, have examples, right? Examples, again, like if in the provincial assessment, that student, for example, that learner in a grade 3 reading test was assessed at a level 1.2, right? At a level 1.2, right? Our children are brilliant, right? So where is, again, some of the cautionary notes about the provincial assessment, right? And also, thinking about the provincial assessment. So in reading, if there was like a comprehension issue with the student, well, maybe it's not a comprehension issue. Maybe it had to do with the text that was being read in the particular provincial assessment. So you need another box that will say, listen, here it is. Here is our cautionary notes. And here are the things that maybe could have been more supportive, right? So again, same thing here, right? We have, the annual program goals, right? But think about it. Where are, again, the goals, right? So again, the goals that also come from the sacred and the spiritual domain. So again, what is again required here in each of those terms is again the observation, right? So we need to have it. We need to have, the goals that show us how the culture and language, worldview and land is also being embedded in each one of those terms, okay? So it needs to be present there as well. And we have the more detailed information as well, language and oral communication. And what I would argue here, my friends, as well, right, is that we also need to have, as part of this, okay, as part of, again, the more detailed notes, we need to have, okay, how is it that, that the physical needs, the intellectual needs, emotional needs, and the spiritual needs are also, again, being addressed here, okay? And take a look at it. What is another word for language, right? So there are ways to change this. And if you can imagine, instead of saying special education, a program, what about calling it honoring our gifts? What about calling it honoring our gifts? Now, human resources, right? Now, it's not only human resources, but where are the more than human resources? So right after this box, there should be the more than human resources that are going to be supporting the learner. What is the land? Is there going to be a ceremony? Is there, a workshop or else a leadership mentorship program? Is there a particular elder or auntie, grandmothers and aunties program to support them? Okay, so there are so many other things. So it's also, again, where are those more than human resources, right? And not only that, the development team, right? So, the team, is not just the staff, right? So it should be the entire team. It's also the student, because this is about them and the family. And of course, again, the community representative, whether it's a special ed itinerant teacher or not, again, that have to be valued, right? And those, again, wonderful, again, transition plans, right? One of the best transition planning tools, okay, besides, the right-eyed view here, my folks, go to ONECA, okay, the Ontario Native Education Counseling Association website. Where is the transition plan that is really based in culture and language, right? So where is it? So these are the things that missing. This is the right-eyed view, the right-eyed tool that is helpful, but what is missing is the entire left eye of that two-eyed seeing view. So this is where you would see ONECA supports, transition supports right behind, right? Now, log of parent and student consultation. Number one, get rid of the word consultation because consultation is actually a really loaded word, my friends, okay? Okay, it is a really, again, loaded term. Get rid of, again, the word consultation, right? What about a conversation, right? So instead of a log, right? Or else, a consultation, or else maybe, it is that good visit, but name it something else, right? Because a consultation, consultation has not been a good word for Indigenous peoples. So again, that needs to be changed. But not only that, right? If we take a look at this, there's a log of the parent and student consultation, right? But not only that, where is also the consultation with that support person? Where's the itinerant spec ed person as well, right? And that, again, is the IEP, right? So again, it's quite fulsome. So it is definitely looking through the right eye. But if you take a look at it, my friends, there are so many opportunities, just small things to begin decolonizing and indigenizing these IEPs so that they reflect the learner and their family and their community in a good way, right? Not only that, that log, right? So again, the parent and student feedback, right? So what about organizing the feedback, right? By organizing the feedback more holistically, right? So again, let's have the feedback of the educator, the student, the parent or guardian, okay? Not only that, what about the itinerant cultural resource person? Let's get the feedback, from those actual, again, members, those team members that are critical to, again, our Benojis. So there's that. But also, so if we can take a look at it, let's look at our consultation, the description of the consultation, right? Let's look at where it's happening. Where is it located? Are we going to where the community is, again, comfortable? Not only that, right? The description of the consultation. Is it addressing a physical need, an emotional need, an intellectual need, or else a spiritual need? So there's information that is missing here that doesn't tell us about what's happening, in terms of honoring that left eye and seeing, again, the IEP in a more constructive way, okay? That really is what it is. Two-eyed seeing is really the approach that is going to empower our children in special education. It is about left eye, foundational, Indigenous culture, language, world first, and then the right eye is all about looking at what those systems have to offer, but taking the best and modifying things so that it honors who we are. Too many parents get news, right? Get news that their kids are going to be going through an IPRC process. Let's make sure that no other parent is going to feel that the IPRC process is a sentence, right? Let us make sure they do not feel that it is a sentence, because it is not. That's why we need to naturalize and normalize left eye and right eye together in spec ed. We're gonna share. What are your takeaways? So I've critically vetted that IEP, gave you some very basic ideas of how to start transforming it, right? There's several pieces. You need to have that cultural model for spec ed. What is a good Anishinaabe human being? What is the stage of life, for that 7-year-old from a Haudenosaunee worldview? Maybe they're at the place where they're supposed to be. So there's ways to do this, my friends. There's some, again, really amazing, again, questions here and points, right? Definitely the stages of life, right? So the stages of life definitely, Julie, come from the community. So Anishinaabe people, there's a couple of really amazing documents out there that actually come from, actually have best start beginnings. And so our 7 stages of life, you'll be able to find them, especially if you ask Anishinaabe knowledge keepers. But yeah, the stages of life, are very clear. The first 7 years, here are the developmental milestones spiritually for our kids, and then we have them, 7 to 14 and so on. And they're called different stages in life, right? So those are what I mean, right? So again, really important. And again, if your beautiful, again, child or grandchild, continues to get assessed and, or else if you have, a child or grandchild, where it seems that this IEP and IPRC process is not working, then that is really, the really critical part about that, right, is ensuring, and really is having an advocate with you, because you need to really find out what is happening with this, right? And why has nothing been done, right? Because remember, the longer that a two-eyed seeing approach is delayed, right? So again, if this beautiful learner had these particular learning issues, right? Again, in grade 1 or grade 2, and if they keep getting bypassed, right? That's so many years of learning, that they have been, again, not been gifted with. So it really is about, having an advocate. So who is the education counselor? Who is, again, if you're on a reserve, who is the council member that's responsible for education, right? Or else who's the educational lead for that school board as well, right? So it's like, listen, here's the issues that we've been having. Nothing's been done. There's been no progress made. So again, that is something that you can do, okay? You need to be able to do that. My beautiful friends, I hope that you were able to take something today and be able to use it. And what you haven't, leave the rest. It is all good.